There are championship teams everyone remembers. And there are championship quarterbacks history quietly reshapes. Not erased, just reduced. Turned into something smaller than what actually happened. Say 1981 Clemson to fans over 45, and they remember the shock of an undefeated season, the Orange Bowl, the moment a Southern program announced itself to the nation. But far fewer immediately name the quarterback who led it all. And that's not an accident, that's a narrative. Homer Jordan was the starting quarterback for Clemson's first national championship team. Undefeated Orange Bowl champion.
Yesterday, we going to the game, we felt that we had to take off a lot because they blitzed a lot. And I did a lot firsthand. We had a good week of practice, and we just went in the game, we accomplished knowing what we had to do. And the game that we had was really sound, and we just took it at that.
Those are facts. Yet somehow, the story that followed him was never about dominance or leadership. It was about qualifiers, and about what he supposedly wasn't. Too often described as a system quarterback, a game manager, or simply a piece of a bigger machine. Language that sounds harmless until it quietly rewrites legacy. Older fans remember how this worked. Sports Illustrated columns, Sunday newspapers, talk radio framing careers, and a few repeated phrases. Once a label stuck, it stopped being questioned. And with Jordan, the media shifted the conversation almost immediately, away from what he accomplished and toward whether he truly deserved the credit. The championship was real, but the praise became negotiable. This story isn't about failure. It's about how winning doesn't always protect you from being misunderstood. How one season can be celebrated while the player who made it possible is slowly minimized. Because when you go back and look at the numbers, the moments, and the pressure he carried, the reality doesn't match the narrative. And that's where the media got it wrong. Before Homer Jordan became a name wrapped in qualifiers, he was simply a quarterback earning his way forward. Long before national titles and Orange Bowls, Jordan was a standout athlete from Athens, Georgia. Not a quarterback handed prestige, but one who had to prove he belonged at every level. In high school, he wasn't just productive, he was versatile, playing quarterback and safety, showing the kind of football intelligence that doesn't always show up in a recruiting rankings but always shows up on film. He wasn't sold as a future star, he was a worker, and that mindset followed him to Clemson. When Jordan arrived in Clemson's program, it wasn't the national brand it would become later. This wasn't a destination job for quarterbacks looking to coast on reputation. Clemson was still building its identity, still fighting for respect in a conference dominated by established powers. Jordan didn't step into a spotlight. He helped create one. By the time he took over as starting quarterback, the Tigers were competitive but unproven, and the burden of consistency fell directly on his shoulders. What Jordan brought wasn't flash, it was command. He could extend plays with his legs, make smart decisions under pressure, and protect the football in an era that punished quarterbacks physically. His style didn't jump off the page, but it controlled games. Teammates trusted him because he didn't chase headlines, he chased wins. Coaches trusted him because he ran the offense exactly as designed while still knowing when to improvise. Yet even early on, you could sense the disconnect forming. He wasn't discussed the other way quarterbacks were. Praise came with conditions. Compliments were careful. He was described as efficient instead of dangerous, steady instead of special. Those words sound supportive, but they plant seeds, they suggest ceilings, they imply limits. And that's important, because labels rarely appear out of nowhere. They're built slowly, piece by piece, long before the moment everyone remembers. Before the championship, before the MVP trophy, before the history books, Homer Jordan was already being framed in a certain way, not as the face of a rising program, but as the guy managing it. And once that idea took hold, it would follow him far longer than anyone realized. The 1981 season didn't begin with Homer Jordan or Clemson penciled into anyone's national championship plans. There were no preseason guarantees, no coronations waiting to happen. Clemson entered the year respected, but far from dominant, and Jordan entered it as a quarterback still carrying quiet doubts about whether he could elevate the program beyond respectability. What followed wasn't a fluke, it was a steady, methodical dismantling of expectations. Week after week, Clemson kept winning, close games, physical games, games where one mistake could flip the season. And through it all, Jordan did exactly what championship quarterbacks do. He made the right decision at the right time. He wasn't chasing stat lines, he was managing moments. Third downs, red zone possessions, late drives when defenses tightened and pressure mounted. His mobility extended plays in an era where quarterbacks weren't protected, and his decision-making kept Clemson from beating itself. As the wins piled up, so did the tension. Clemson climbed the rankings, and with each rise came a louder microscope. The questions around Jordan didn't disappear, they intensified. Was the defense carrying him? Was the system simplifying reads? Was he good enough to be the reason Clemson was undefeated? These weren't debates rooted in losses or mistakes. They existed alongside perfection. By the time Clemson reached the Orange Bowl, the stakes were unmistakable. An undefeated season, a national title on the line, a chance for Jordan to either validate everything or confirm the doubts. And on that stage against Nebraska, he delivered the defining performance of his career. He didn't fade, he didn't play cautiously, he controlled the game, made plays with both his arms and legs, and earned offensive MVP honors and a championship victory that completed a perfect season. In theory, that should have settled everything. Championships usually end arguments, MVP trophies usually silence critics. But with Jordan, the narrative didn't stop. The accomplishment was acknowledged, but the questions remained, quietly suggesting that something else deserved more credit. That season changed Clemson forever. It raised banners, rewrote history, and secured immortality for the program. But for the quarterback at its center, it also set the stage for a debate that never quite matched the reality on the field. You would think an undefeated season and a national championship would lock a quarterback's reputation in place. For most players, that's where the story ends. For Homer Jordans, that's where the framing began to shift. Almost immediately after Clemson reached the mountaintop, the conversation around him changed from celebration to qualification. The questions weren't loud, but they were persistent, and they mattered more than most people realized at the time. Instead of being discussed as the engine of a title team, Jordan was increasingly described as a complement to it. Media coverage leaned into language that softened his impact. He was efficient, not dominant, steady, not special, a leader, but not a star. These distinctions sound subtle, but they're powerful. They shape how fans remember careers long after the games fade. And once those phrases made their way into columns, broadcasts, and conversations, they stuck. Part of it came from expectations. Jordan didn't look like the prototype quarterback the media loved to market. He wasn't tall enough. His game wasn't built around deep, highlight reel throws. He won with timing, intelligence, and mobility, traits that don't always photograph well on magazine covers. And rather than adjusting the story to fit the results, the media adjusted the results to fit the story they already believed. The championship didn't erase those doubts, it complicated them. So instead of asking how Jordan made it all work, coverage often pivoted to who or what deserved the most credit. The defense became the headline. The coaching staff became the explanation. The system became the excuse. Jordan's role was acknowledged, but rarely centered. And that's how reputations quietly change, not through criticism, but through omission. When success is constantly attributed elsewhere, the player at the center slowly fades from the spotlight. The public doesn't remember what you did, they remember how people talked about you while you did it. By the time Jordan's college career was over, the media had already written its version of his story. A good quarterback on a great team, a champion but not a centerpiece. It was a narrative that felt reasonable, sounded informed, and spread easily. And once it settled in, it became the lens through which everything that followed would be viewed. The problem was, that lens never fully reflected the truth. Jordan wasn't asked to simply hand the ball off and stay out of the way. Clemson's offense depended on his decision-making. Over his career, he accounted for thousands of total yards through the air and on the ground, using his legs not as a bailout, but as a weapon. In an era where quarterbacks took real punishment, Jordan extended drives, escaped pressure, and turned broken plays into first downs. That ability doesn't show up in highlight montages, but it shows up on scoreboards. More importantly, it showed up in moments. Third and longs, tight red zone possessions, games where one mistake would have ended the perfect season before it ever reached January. Clemson didn't just win big, it survived close calls. And survival in college football almost always falls on the quarterback. Those are the situations where system quarterbacks usually get exposed. Jordan didn't. He stabilized them. The Orange Bowl performance wasn't an outlier, it was confirmation. Against Nebraska, with everything on the line, Jordan didn't defer responsibility. He made plays with his arm, punished defenses with his legs, and controlled the tempo of the game. Being named Offensive MVP in a national championship game isn't a courtesy award. It's a recognition that in the biggest moment, the offense ran through you. Yet, even with that resume, the narrative persisted because the media rarely revisits assumptions once they're made. The numbers were acknowledged but contextualized away. The moments were praised but treated as exceptions rather than patterns. And slowly, the facts became supporting details instead of the headline. That's the danger of narrative-driven memory. When a story takes hold early, evidence gets filtered through it instead of challenging it. And in Jordan's case, the reality, production, leadership, and championship moments never aligned with the shorthand used to describe him. But by then, the shorthand had already won. By the time Homer Jordan's college career ended, the story surrounding him was already settled into the public mind. He was respected, but not revered, successful, but not celebrated. And that distinction matters, because reputation doesn't just affect how a player is remembered, it affects what comes next. For quarterbacks especially, perception often determines opportunity as much as performance. Despite leading Clemson to an undefeated national championship and earning major postseason honor, Jordan entered the professional world without the momentum usually attached to quarterbacks with his resume. He wasn't viewed as a franchise prospect or a developmental priority. The questions that followed him through college didn't disappear, they followed him into draft rooms and front offices. Concerns about size, style, and ceiling outweighed the evidence of winning under pressure. Jordan's professional path reflected that reality. He spent time in the CFL and later appeared as a replacement player in the NFL, a route that rarely aligns with how championship quarterbacks imagine their futures. For many fans, that trajectory became confirmation of the college moment, modest professional outcome. What got lost was everything in between: the leadership, the decision-making, the pressure he handled, and the fact that opportunity is rarely equal once reputations are set. Jordan didn't fail to live up to expectations. Expectations were quietly lowered around him long before he ever reached the next level. And once that happened, every step of his career was viewed through that diminished lens. That's the final consequence of when the media gets it wrong. The story doesn't just shape memory, it shapes futures. Time has a way of softening stories without actually fixing them. With Homer Jordan, the years didn't bring controversy or debate, they brought silence. Clemson's 1981 championship became a celebrated moment in college football history, replayed in highlight packages and anniversary retrospectives. But the quarterback at the center of it all was often mentioned briefly and then moved past. The program was honored, the season was remembered, the legacy, however, remained incomplete. Only later did recognition begin. After leading a perfect season, he was honored by the Orange Bowl Hall of Fame. And in 2024, he was inducted into the Georgia High School Football Hall of Fame, a reminder that long before the narratives formed, he had been a remarkable football player at every level. These honors didn't rewrite history, they confirmed what was already there. But recognition after the fact doesn't always undo the damage of early framing. For many fans, the shorthand version of Homer Jordan still lingers. The idea that he was more caretaker than catalyst, more beneficiary than driver. And that's the power of narrative inertia. Once a story becomes uncomfortable, it rarely gets challenged unless someone actively revisits it. When you step back and look honestly, Jordan's career resists simplification. He didn't just quarterback a championship team, he stabilized it. He didn't just manage games, he delivered in moments where failure would have ended everything. He led an unranked program through pressure that would have cracked his exists. Not to rewrite history, but to revisit it honestly. To separate narrative from reality and give context back to players whose legacies were shaped more by media framing than by what actually happened on the field. If you grew up watching these games, reading these columns, and listening to the radio debates, you know how easily a reputation could stick, even when the results said otherwise. This channel is about going back, slowing down, and telling the full story the way it should have been told the first time. If you appreciate deep dives into forgotten moments, misunderstood players, and old school football history that respects the era, make sure you like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Old School Sundays. More stories like this are coming because there are plenty of legacies that still deserve a second look.